Going live. Live. Live.
All right. So I hope I'm live now. Hi, everyone. I welcome you all to Inside IIM's MBA Brew Episode 2, Last Mile VARC Revision. I'm sure all of you now are ready to take the CAT. I'm hoping to share a few cents from my own experience, and I hope that helps you to be better prepared for the exam. So I'll do a quick round of my introduction, and then we can begin with the session. So my name is Akansha Chachra. I'm a first-year PGP student at IIM Bangalore. Before that, I worked for 2 years as a senior research analyst at Value Notes. It is a market research firm based in Pune. And right before that, I pursued an arts degree from Ferguson College, again in Pune itself. And today, I'm excited to be here. I'm hoping and I'm looking forward for an engaging session. So I'll just share my screen and we can then get started with it. All right. So I hope my screen is visible to all of you. I'll keep the live chat on next to me as well. So if there are any questions at any point of time, feel free to reach out to me. All right, everyone. So let's get started with the session. So last mile VRC revision. Just a quick disclaimer. This session is not going to be about strategies and what to do now and how can you take the exam better in the last minute. You can learn something. It's not going to about that. It's just going to be a quick round of session on how to take the VRC with a calm and a composed manner and not taking any stress. We only have 5 days now, and I don't think this is the time to suddenly change your strategies and do something out of the blue. So let's get started with it. So just a brief overview of how we'll take the session. As you can see, we'll do a quick overview of the CAT exam. We'll look at the details of the VARC section. We'll briefly look at how to approach VARC. Then we'll also look at some empirical rules or some ways to avoid any traps and how you can eliminate any incorrect options. And lastly, we'll look at the right mindset, which you should have 5 days before CAT. We'll have a Q&A session as well. And at any point of time, if you feel you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat as well. All right. So as you all know, I'll not spend a lot of time on this. This is just to keep you comfortable and make you acquainted with the test once before the exam. As you all know, we have the CAT on this Sunday, 26th November for 2 hours. I'm sure everybody has received their slots by now. So make sure that you reach well before time to your test center. And make sure that you have all your documents necessary with you, your Aadhaar card, your admit card, and you are in a very comfortable mindset when you are there, right? So don't rush through the test center. Make sure you leave well before time. And quickly about the sections, you know, you have VARC, DLR, and QA. Today's session will be focused on VARC, and we'll just quickly delve into that now. All right. So for the VARC section, I hope you can see the screen clearly. At any point, if there are any concerns, please drop a message on the chat. All right. So the VARC session, as you know, you have the two sections. You have verbal ability and your reading comprehension. Your VA will have roughly 8 questions, 6 MCQ and 2 MCQ non-MCQ questions, which all of this will be covered across para summaries, para jumbles, and para sequencing. As you all are aware, last year in last year's CAT 2022, we had a new set of questions which was para sequencing. However, we will briefly discuss about how I went about it when I saw a new question and how you can also do the same if you see something new come up in your section. Then in the RC, as you know, you have 16 roughly questions from around 4 questions per RC. You will have that. Then I'm not really delving into the score versus percentile. This is just a brief outlook of how it could look like and how it was in CAT 2022. However, this definitely varies by a few scores every year. So at least by last year, you could score above 95 percentile with a score of 29, which is roughly attempting 10 questions accurately. And all right, so if you look at the types of questions, so let's now delve into the VARC section in depth. We will be covering this in the next slide as well. So we have the 3 main kind of questions which you usually find. So you have the central idea questions, where you read the key points and then you understand the author's main or the key interest very well. Then you have your inference-based questions, where you have to derive indirect conclusions and analyze the hidden meanings behind any passage, behind those words. And lastly, you have your fact-based questions, which tend to be on the easier side. You recall any details and which are there in the passage and only then answer the questions. So we will discuss about this briefly as well. All right. Before I move to the next section, I will let you know how my VARC section went. So in the first attempt when I had taken it, when I had taken CAT in 2020, I scored around 78%. I think it was my absolute lowest score, even in mocks, in fact. And it did not go well. And in 2022, what I did was I had a very different experience this in that year, even during my preparation phase. So during the exam, we firstly had a new kind of question, right? So I'll also walk you through how I went about it. So when I saw the first question come up on the screen, my usual way to go about it is to quickly scan through all the RCs and rank them on an order which is as per my convenience. Do I know the topic? Am I familiar with the kind of words which are being used? Is the passage very text heavy or is it light? And also if they are from domains of in which I'm interested in, right? So those were the things which I was focusing on. And accordingly, I used to rank them. Very rarely did I change the ranking while taking the test. It was only when, let's say, I'm solving an RC and I just cannot solve it, then I move to the next one. So my approach was the first 2-3 minutes just to get acquainted with the kind of RCs which I will be solving first. I never looked at the verbal questions till at least half the paper was over, actually. Right. So after going through these 3 to 4 minutes of just going through the section, I used to start with the paper. I did 3 RCs first, which is roughly in 24 odd minutes. And then in the last 16 minutes, some part of it was focused for VA. And then the last 5 to 7 minutes, I used to spend on the last RC or any other question which I might have missed on before. And that's how I used to take my VRC section. However, I would still advise all of you at this point of time, please do not consider changing your strategies. It may not, it might actually backfire than really help you. So stick with your gut, stick with what you have done till now, and only adapt if you see something new. And that is what I did when I faced the para sequencing question. So while I was going through the paper and I randomly saw 2 new questions, my first reaction, my first instinct was to ignore it and just move on to the paper and continue and solve everything else. And at the end, come back to that question. So, and that is exactly what I did. And it absolutely worked in my favor. The questions were easy and I did not have any pressure to get them done in the first 35 minutes of the section. I only focused on it, I think, in the last 7-8 minutes, whatever was remaining. And luckily, the questions were also on the easier side. So in your case, if you find a question which is out of the blue, which is something you have not solved before, don't worry, we will take it up. You can do it well and you can still manage it without worrying about it. The best strategy is to ignore it till the end and then look at it once you're done with everything else. All right. So before moving further, let's just look at one or two questions here. So we have somebody saying, this score percentile table is VARC specific. Yes, Perleen, this is particularly for the VARC section, and it is based on CAT 2022 scores. And these are the scaled scores, in fact. So, all right, we will move to the next section now. So I'll do a quick recap of how to approach your VARC section. So firstly, as soon as you get your passages, as soon as you start reading a particular passage, the key thing in your mind should be that you capture the author's perspective really well. So right now, we will not delve into how to exactly do it. I'll not put up a passage to scare you and then we go about it. That's not the agenda of today's session. Right now, all you need to remember, these are just pointers which you need to remember before you take the test. So just quickly pinpoint the author's perspective, right? And you have to make sure you are understanding the key ideas of each passages. That is what helps you to understand the author's perspective well. Again, another thing here is make sure that you are not coming towards that point where you are taking up something which is your external bias. So make sure you're not looking at the external information or any other sort of information and considering it in the while reading a passage. All right. Before I move to the second point, I can see a question. Um, Jaswant, yes, I will not be discussing any questions here because that's not the agenda today. I will, however, be discussing how can you approach a question and how can you eliminate options in RCs, especially in the verbal section. As you know, it's more difficult to eliminate an option than to select. Sorry, it's easier to actually eliminate options than to find one correct answer. So that is one thing which we will be covering today, but we will not be solving any questions today. I don't think that would be the best idea and it would just increase your stress, I feel. So it's better to avoid that as of now. All right. So moving on from the first point, the second bit is you have to make sure that you're able to skim through all the points and concentrate on the key words in any passage, the shifting words, any word which is which triggers you and makes you see, okay, now the tone has changed or the author is talking about something specific and you know that you need to focus more on it. So make sure every passage you're able to get the key ideas well, you're able to summarize the main idea based on the individual ideas. Thirdly, again, grasp the overall tone and the theme of the passage. So, tone is something which you really need to be careful about because more often than not, when you're not able to capture the tone well, you might even mess up in some answers and when you're solving those questions. So, for example, the author might be talking about a very positive thing and he might be saying it in a very positive manner with the words that he's or she is using in the passage. But when you come to a question and there's an option which clearly is showing the author in a negative light or is saying something which is in a very negative sense, that may not be the correct answer. So make sure you're not falling to that trap. Right. Lastly, again, this is a very common theory. It's a framework which has been built by I think one of the most famous professors in Career Launcher, Jijo Sir. So he uses the Bain theory. The Bain theory basically states that you can eliminate options which are excessively broad, unfamiliar, limited, or alien or extreme. So broad is basically any. I think we'll cover this in the next section in detail as well. But any option which is too broad in its setting in the context, or is it's an entirely unfamiliar or not even mentioned in the passage, or it's an extreme option which is not really relevant to the question. So, or there's let's say limited information, or it's too narrow. If you look at the question, so you have to make sure that you are avoiding all those pointers. So use this theory; it helps you to eliminate options very easily. All right. So at any point, if there are any questions, do let me know. We can quickly take up a few questions in between, and at the end, we'll take it up in more depth. All right. So moving to the next bit, we will be looking at a few rules or to eliminate incorrect options. This is something I'm sure you might have come across multiple times now. Many professors talk about this. There's a long list of traps which you can avoid. We will be looking at the most common ones and how you can also eliminate an option. So more often than not, the question setters are just trying to see if they can fool you. And you have to make sure that you do not fall into their trap, right? And one of the most basic ways to trap you into selecting the wrong option is wordplay. So what question setters usually do is they change a few words here and there, and they try to confuse you, and that entirely changes the meaning of the option. And you have to be very careful. A few words here and there can entirely change the meaning of a statement. So make sure you're not falling for that trap. Then the second is extreme option. So quite often it happens that the author might just be talking about, okay, one person did something bad. Whereas the option in that particular question could be something like, okay, this person always is bad, or this person has let's say done something really horrible, and they just blow it out of proportion. So any options where suddenly you see a shift in tone, where you're seeing something small being made big out of being made a big deal. So you have to make sure you're not falling for those traps, right? So this is the second thing. Thirdly, we have out of scope options. So out of scope options are actually the easier ones to catch. These you might usually not fall in this trap because it's easier to, I think, pinpoint this out. just make sure anything which is not even relevant to the question or the passage, if that is being talked about, make sure to eliminate it right away. And sometimes question setters do something smart here is instead of giving something out of context or giving something entirely out of the passage, they might just give you something from the passage itself, but maybe from a paragraph which is not relevant. So maybe there are 4 paragraphs and the question is relevant to the third paragraph, but in the options, you might find one option which is, let's say, talking about something random in the first paragraph, right? So you have to make sure you're not falling for those traps as well. So out of scope is still easier, but within the passage also make sure you're not getting confused between options. Right. So moving on to the next one, we have the attractive word trap. I think this is one of the most used traps as well, which is just using random words from the passage and making an option. This is the most difficult one to eliminate sometimes because you don't really understand what a statement means and you just pick that option because you see words which are familiar, which because you see something which is already written in the passage. So you think, okay, maybe this is right. It uses words from this passage, but be very careful. One word here and there, and then you will think that that's the right option, but it usually is not. So be very careful in getting the crux of the passage or the and understanding the question really well to avoid falling into this trap. All right. Next, we have the misplacing words. This is kind of similar to a point we discussed before. This basically, misplacing words basically means you reorder a few words and change the meaning. So if something is, let's say, A, B, C, D, E, you just make it D, E, A, B, C. The words are still familiar, but the option is entirely wrong because it's just changing the meaning or it's just abrupt words placed here and there to confuse you, right? So that's another trap. Then we have narrow. Narrow is something we discussed previously or in the previous slide. Narrow is basically restricting your point of view for the option. So the author might be talking about, let's say, oh, this country is facing a huge crisis. There's a lot of there's floods happening all over the year, and that's suppose let's say the question, and that's the context. Whereas an option might say, ki, oh, just one flood happened this rainy season. That's all. So this is basically narrowing down an option. Uh, drastically. So, as something which might be really important is made to be very menial. Now, the opposite of this is the broad trap. So, the broad is basically the author might be saying something which is very minor, and you just make it a whole big deal out of it, where you're looking at a bird eye view when it is not required. So, that is the exact opposite of that. All right. Then we have your cause and effect trap. So, cause and effect is basically so there are maybe 2 or 3 things mentioned in the passage and you just link them together and say, okay, because of this happened, whereas it might not be the case. So just because it's mentioned in the passage and creating a link between them is one of the traps which is also usually given in options. So make sure you're not following for that trap again. Very clearly, you can see if cause and effect options are mentioned because more often than not, you will have some conjunction connecting 2 parts of a statement, and that will help you understand how can you link this. So you should question yourself, why would the author say about that when it's not even mentioned? So be very careful and nitpicky when you're trying to look at those options. Then we have hasty generalization. This is actually not just relevant to CAT. This is something which even we do quite often. People tend to do this quite often, where they'll take one bit and just generalize the whole thing. So if somebody is late once to a class, you might just say, okay, that person is always late to class. So that is hasty generalization. I think this is, again, one of the easier traps to avoid, where you just state one small incident as the norm, or you take an example and make it to be something as a fact. So hasty generalization is something you should be very careful about. Then we have tone change. Again, we had briefly discussed it before. So this would be drastically or very subtly maybe changing the tone from positive to negative or vice versa. So the author might be talking about something in a very light-hearted manner, and then you present it in a negative light in an option, or you can do the vice versa thing. So make sure that any option that you're selecting is in line with the author's tone or in the passage. So these are very easier. These are some minor things which you can easily avoid. So if you're careful when selecting options. Lastly, we have external information. So this is again, any information which is outside the passage or not relevant to the particular context is something which you can easily avoid. So I hope this list helps you to get some idea of how you can avoid certain traps. This is not This is not an exhaustive list. Of course, there are a lot of ways how a question setter can try to fool you, but always have one thing in mind, have one clear idea that the author is what the author is trying to say is the correct thing. And if you get the author's key idea well, solving the questions and answers would be a breeze. Yeah. So we'll just take up another question which I see. Should we attempt all RC, 3 or 4 VA, or 3 RC plus all VA? All right. So I think again, if you already have a strategy, that's great. My strategy was yes, solving almost all RCs and almost all VA. I only used to miss out on those questions which I thought were very difficult or which I might have missed because of lack of time. So mostly I used to do 3.5 RCs, you can say, and almost 6 questions of VA, assuming I missed out on 1 or 2 because I was not sure of an answer. So having a range of 18 to 19 questions, if you solve 18 to 19 questions in the paper with a decent accuracy of above 80%, I think you will be in a good range. However, I think that's a very one kind of a case, I would say. So in your question, I think if you have seen that solving all RCs and a few VA has helped you and you're able to do that in that amount of time, that's good already. But don't restrict yourself. If you have the time and if you can spend some more time in a particular RC, don't stop yourself. But again, be very careful in solving the questions. Just don't go on 26th and suddenly solve everything because you're there now thinking, okay, I should mark everything, or maybe suddenly changing your strategy. So, like I've already mentioned before, do not change your strategy now. It would be a very bad idea. I would only suggest you to adapt your strategy to that day's paper. You might find something new, so briefly you might have to change your strategy. So what has worked for you till now is what will definitely work for you that day. So make sure you don't do something drastic. All right. So I think I've covered a good chunk of how you can go about your VARC section. If there are any particular doubts to the section and how to approach a particular question or a particular kind of a question type as well, you can drop your messages or your questions on chat. Now we'll just do a last section where we just briefly look at what is the kind of mindset you should have just 5 days before CAT. Again, like I've said multiple times before now, do not change your strategy, do not stress, and do not do anything out of the blue. This is not the time to suddenly build up a new strategy or start solving a lot of questions. So that is something I'm sure everybody knows by now. All right. So firstly, yes, rest and sleep as per your as per your time slots. Make sure if you're not able to do it on the last 1 or 2 days, and if you haven't done it till now, please go and have utmost sleep now. That take utmost care of yourself and sleep on time now. For me, I had the 12:30 slot, so it was not very difficult for me to manage my sleep time. I usually wake up around 8 or 9, and that helped me to I was able to do that even for CAT as well. So for anyone, if you have still not changed your sleep routine, you still have 5 days. Make sure you're doing that. Then again, ensure that you're wide awake during your slot. If you have your slot between 4:30 to 6:30, you should not be doing anything else in that slot. It's especially not sleeping. Make sure you're well rested and wide awake before during that time period, even in the next 5 days. Then again, eat well and avoid any sort of junk food. Just the basic things. I'm sure you guys already know this, but just a quick reminder, if you have that temptation, it's better to avoid it than go with an upset stomach or maybe some headache or anything like that. So make sure you avoid all these things right now. Then avoid watching anything for longer hours, any TV shows or movies, etc. For me personally, I did watch 1 or 2 shows that, so I knew that I did not want to stress myself out, and so I had taken a leave from my job for that week. And additionally, I was just spending time relaxing. I used to watch 1 or 2 episodes of one of my favorite shows, and that definitely helped me. So similarly for you, anything which helps you to reduce the stress or reduce any pressure, please do that. Now is not the time that you go and take multiple mocks, right? Then of course, if you think your performance will not be affected by your mocks right now, then take one last mock before 23rd itself, and ideally take a mock which you have taken before as well. So I mean, instead of taking a new mock altogether and going through that pressure again, just take something which you have done before, or take a past year question paper itself. That would help you to boost your confidence as well, because most likely you have solved those questions already. So make sure you're doing that. And lastly, of course, the last thing you can do now is worry about the uncontrollables. So make sure you're not worrying about things which are not in your hand. Few things which you should keep in mind is that if something new happens or abruptly different happens on that day, let's say your pen is not working or your screen is not working, you're facing some trouble here and there, don't worry about all of that. You have invigilators, you have a tech team, or you have some people around who will definitely help you out. So this, all you have to do is, as soon as you face some issue, just inform the invigilator. That's all. Don't create stress around you and for yourself as well. Be calm and deal with those things. Similarly, if you see a new question altogether, do not panic and just start worrying about yourself. You have to be that voice in your head who keeps telling you that it's all right and that things will be all right. Nobody else is going to do it for you on the day of CAT, so make sure you're doing that as well. All right, I think I have covered this as well. So if there are any questions at this point of time, feel free to shoot up on the chat box. We can take it up one by one. If you think you have any particular doubts to how to approach VRC or any other section for that matter, you can definitely let me know. We have taken a few questions before already. So if there are any particular concerns, maybe about DILR or QA as well, or how to approach the overall CAT paper, you can drop your messages. All right. So I can see one question here by Akash. Okay. I was good at VRC scoring around 85 to 90 percentile. Suddenly it came down to 50, 60. What to do right now? All right. So if you see a sudden drop in your scores and it is something, let's say, which is recent, most likely it's probably because of the pressure of the last few days. And if you think it has been happening for a long period of time, maybe a longer period, then I think it's a problem. And I think now the only thing you can do is trust your instincts. I'm sure you have already solved a lot of mocks and you are in a good space. But if you feel that this is just the last few mocks you have taken, maybe the last 1 or 2 weeks, most likely you are in a good place. Don't worry about it. People do tend to see lower scores in the last phase. So to tackle that, in the next 5 days, my advice would be go back to some of the mocks which you have taken and just scan through the mistakes you might have made, or scan through the questions which were there, the way whether you solved them correctly or not, were you able to get it right this time or not. So avoid taking a full length mock and suddenly you won't suddenly see a boost in your section. I would suggest look at the questions which you have solved before, maybe attempt 1 or 2 mocks, 2 sectionals for VARC before 23rd, where you can basically tomorrow and day after, maybe you can take one sectional where you take a focused approach and solve it in more, let's say, with more enthusiasm and energy as well. I'm pretty sure bogging down with any sort of pressure will not help you at this point. So don't suddenly start reading A on essays or like watching multiple YouTube videos. Not the time. Just look at sections which you have solved before itself. So I hope that answers your question. All right. So we have Robin who says, no matter how many questions I attempt, the accuracy remains the same. Should I focus on maximizing my attempts? All right. So maximizing your attempts is only helpful when you do it, when you balance it out with, let's say, the number of correct answer that you have. So if the balance changes between the two, then most likely you will again lose out itself. So just maximizing your attempt, I don't think is the best idea. And now regarding accuracy remaining the same. So what I would suggest is approach CAT in a way like you are maybe a manager. You are ultimately getting into an MBA program. So think of it as a manager would. Their job is not to read passages and answer one, two, three questions, right? Their job is to just understand the crux of any written material and interpret it. And that's exactly what in CAT you will be expected to do, and after CAT as well. So right now, as just a brief I can give you is that you get multiple case studies to read for any lecture or any course that you have taken. So the key thing is to read the passages well and understand the key points, and so that you can interpret it and answer the questions. That's the exact mentality you need to build for solving this as well. Your job is not to look at it as a reading comprehension exam, but to look at it as an exam of interpretation. Can you understand the author's point of view well? And can you exactly mark that? And can you make sure to skip the wrong ones by eliminating it in a smart manner? So, as you remember, if you have seen before, we briefly discussed the kind of traps which you need to avoid. Just go through them, go through a few examples. I can even share an insight from, like, there are one or two professors which have really good videos out there on YouTube, so barely half an hour videos. If that is something which can help you, I think you can try that as well. So that basically lists down every kind of trap which you might face. It's just a half an hour video which we can, I think, put it on chat later on. All right. So the next question we have is, when you were giving VARC on D-Day, you were written important things like main idea or some important info. All right. So I personally avoided writing anything down in paper for VARC because I used to do that in the very initial phase of my preparation, where I used to write a few words maybe. So at by the end of it, I got used to retaining information, and hence I really did not require the need to write it down. The only thing, there were two things which I wrote down in my paper and I remember it. One was the the minutes of the timer which I need to keep track of. So for me, my timer limit was in the first 2 or 3 minutes, I have to scan the paper. By the time I reached roughly 32 minutes on the timer, I should be almost done with one RC. Then I think 26 minutes, then I should be done with another RC. And maybe 20 odd minutes or 18 minutes, I should be done with the third RC. So that's why I just used to write those timers, minutes in my VRC in one of the papers, just to keep track that I'm looking at the timer when the timer hits, let's say 32, and then 26, 20, 18, things like that. The other thing I wrote was, if there was, let's say, a passage where I could see the some keywords or some key ideas which I could immediately capture by the end of reading the passage, I used to just write it down in barely a few words. But that also is something I did maybe for one or two passages, but I did not write detailed points for any passage. All right. So next question I can see. Okay, we have a question from Akash itself. Whenever I solve two sets from LRDI, unknowingly I neglect the QA section. All right. How to stay focused during this time? By the time I reach QA, I'm like really exhausted. All right. So okay, this is something at this point of time, I wish this was not a concern which you were facing, but I don't think there's any harm in that. What you can actually do now is, you have the next 5 days. Make sure for at least 2 hours in your slot, you are active enough. You're doing something solid, where maybe you can just instead of wasting time during those 2 hours or doing absolutely nothing, you can just go through revision of your mocks. Make sure you're sitting for 2 hours consistently in those in your slot. If it's 12:30 to 2:30, do nothing except like doing some work related to CAT, maybe going through your old notes, maybe going through a mock which you have taken before. And especially if the transition from LRDI to QA is something which is bothering you, then for sure what you should do is, as of now, don't lose that energy. Honestly, see, LRDI is the only section which has the maximum part to mess up in during the paper. The chances of messing up LRDI is high, because if you do not crack the set immediately in the first, let's say, 10-20 minutes, then you start freaking out. However, that's a very normal feeling. I have, in both the times I have taken CAT, I have faced that in the first 10-15 minutes I was done with nothing. But that does not mean that you cannot perform better. The only thing, that you need to have that mental bandwidth and the emotional strength to tell yourself that I can manage this, right? So, because on the day of CAT, nobody will do it for you. So ensure that you are pushing yourself. So objectively, what you should be doing is, in your exam slot for the next 5 days, just maybe put an alarm for 2 hours, do nothing, but just study, right? Um, because the temptation to get distracted and use your phone is very high. So you should avoid doing that by focusing on those two during those 2 hours. All right. So if there are any other questions, we can take it up. We have taken up the VARC question as well and QA as well. So let me know if you guys have any other questions. At this point, I'm sure everybody is well prepared. The only thing which is bothering you is the pressure and any other factors which are there. But I would suggest till 26th November, don't let anything hamper you. There's no point worrying about anything. Anyway, you have to take the CAT. Anyway, you will be going through those 2 hours, right? So unnecessarily don't add to the pressure. And your goal should not be MBA or interviews at this moment. Just CAT for the next 5 days. Once that is done, you will have problems to worry about, but not the at this moment. So keep your calm. Make sure you are around people who help you, who support you, and do not bother you. So that is something which you should keep in mind as well. All right. If there are any other questions, do let me know. Or otherwise, we can wrap up the session in a few minutes. All right. So I cannot see any more questions now. I think we have covered a good chunk. And again, like I discussed initially itself, this session is not to help you build a new strategy or help you understand and solve any more questions. I, I think the time for solving questions and everything is done now. Most mentors, most professors across places have started saying the same thing anyway. So I hope you're not mentally worried about all these things. Okay, so I can see another point. Something to keep in the back of mind while attempting VRC. Sure. So one thing for me was, at least during VRC, is there are times when you will get distracted. And in the first 4 to 5 minutes of the paper will be stressful because there will be people around you. There will be invigilators hovering around you, trying to tell you, okay, start the exam and do this and do that. So the chances of things going wrong in the first few minutes is pretty high because you start worrying or you might panic, right? So in that minute, what I did personally was I just closed my ears. I literally sat like this for a few minutes and I just looked at the screen for some time. So this, what did help, how it helped me was it helped me to be focused. It helped me to stay focused and be a bit calm while there was chaos around. And you never know what kind of test center you might get, right? There might be something happening outside, which is not again in your control. So the best thing to do right now in that moment would be to just shut your ears for some time and sit calmly for a few minutes. And in the back of your mind, always keep reminding yourself that you have to ultimately understand the crux of the author and of the passage by understanding what the author is trying to say. If you can get that minor difference in how the question is set and what the author is saying, how the options are shaped. If you can look at the difference, the minor, the subtleties in that, you will be able to clear the test. And as you all know, more often than not, people get stuck between two options in VARC. Any sort of questions you will see, you will be able to eliminate at least two options easily. It's only the last one or two questions where people start worrying and they are not able to differentiate. And that is when you need to remember the kind of traps which question setters put it out there for you. So make sure you are wary of that. So in the back of your mind, two things. One is remembering what the author is trying to say, and the second is remembering the kind of traps and how they are trying to trick you. So make sure you don't let the question setter trick you. That's all. All right. So if there are any more questions, we can look at it. Otherwise, we will wrap up the session in the next few minutes. All right. Even for QA, for that matter, how to not let performance in one section influence the next one, performance in LR affecting QA. Okay. So, honestly speaking, I can only give you very basic advice, which I'm sure you already know, which is as simple as Don't let the stress from one section move to the other. And how to ensure that practically, as soon as you see the DILR section is ended, you are done with that section for that whole year. Think of it that way. There's no point going back. You cannot switch or any tab. You cannot click on any button which takes you back. And in those few seconds of transition, the only thing that will help you is to not lose your calm here in your head. If you think you cannot do it immediately, my advice would be practically just take 10 seconds off. Just shut your head for, just lie down for just 10 seconds so that you can be composed and move to the next section. And 10 seconds is nothing. You won't lose out on anything huge. It will actually help you to sustain the performance further as well. So for me, in my DILR, this did happen, of course. DILR is that section which tends to mess you up the most. And despite being one of your stronger sections, it can actually sometimes affect your mindset for QA. So for me personally, in fact, if you guys know, in CAT 22, the second slot was one of the most difficult ones for DILR because there was a lot of confusion in one or two questions as well. So because of that, an entire set was a big concern. So during that time, I also faced that issue. I was not able to solve more than, I think, two, three, not, I did solve three sets, but one set was a huge mistake from my end because of one or two errors. So, however, in that moment, I did not know. So my goal was, I don't even care once the clock strikes zero and I move to the next section. So that mentally, if you think you cannot do it immediately, so two things. One, take a 10-second break. Just lie down and just maybe take a few seconds to compose yourself and just open the screen again and look at QA. Okay, now you have QA. That is one. Another thing is, you can take a few breaths and then start the section. And these things, although which may sound very fancy or like things which you think, okay, these do not work, but frankly, they actually do. Just try it out. And I hope you do not take the stress of one section to the other. Think of it as 40 minutes, 40-minute slots of three different things when there's no overlap anyway. You have to score well in all three. You have to be strong for all the three sections. So they just don't have any overlap. So go with that mindset, and keep verbally reminding yourself in your head, okay, this is done. Now it's the time for DILR, and now it's the time for QA. Once it's done, right? It's just to us. And after that, take all the stress and all the uh, any sort of venting out you want to do after the exam's over. You will have ample time to do that, and hopefully everybody does well. You don't have to worry about it too much. Okay, all right. So I hope I've been able to answer your questions. If there are still any further questions, you can definitely drop in the chat, or we can even take it up further. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn by my name itself. You can find me there. I'll also share my email in a while. If you have any particular concerns, you can always drop an email. Even once CAT is done, if there are any concerns about your interview preparation or how should you go about it, we can do that later. But till 26th, do not care about anything. Everything will be still available online. There's nothing new which will happen. And on the day, if especially for people in slot 2 and slot 3, do not start worrying about your slot 1. Don't start seeing okay, there's something new which came up out of blue and you should start worrying about it. Don't do that. Even I was in slot 2. I had a new question which I got to know. Okay, I got to know in some time that okay, slot 1 has a new question. Honestly, my reaction to that was just seeing one of the channels where I found, okay, this is the kind of new question, paragraph sequencing. I was like, great. I Googled it. What is paragraph sequencing? What is that? What are one or two kind of questions which have come before? And I looked at that. Within 15 minutes, I closed my phone. I did not care about it because honestly, I couldn't do much about it, even if it was a new question. So I would also advise you the same, especially slot 2 and slot 3. Do not keep going back and asking and looking at WhatsApp groups or looking at Telegram because they will only cause you more stress than alleviating it. So make sure you're not doing these things. All right. So all the best, everybody. Take out. I hope everybody is able to look at the diva inside and whatever makes you feel and believe in yourself, whatever gives you that strength. Follow that. Do anything in these next 5 days to calm yourself down, to be composed. There's no point taking any stress. No matter how much I repeat it, I'm sure everybody will still feel that pinch. I have been there. I'm sure you will be there. You are in that same space now. But yeah, ultimately things do work out in the end, and I'm hoping everybody can find their inner diva and inner strength and whatever helps them to float their boat. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well as on email. If there's any other questions, you can always reach out on any of these platforms. So all the best, everybody. I hope you give your best on D-Day. So thank you, everyone.